Alright, so in this video I'm going to go over a hopefully easy to understand method of UVing, with focus being on just kind of quickly, with as few steps as possible, generating good solid UVs that you can use for texturing without worrying too much about stretching or seams or anything like that. I'd probably still use this technique on something that's a little bit more complicated, like, you know, if I'm UVing a character's head and I want to make sure that their face texture is flawlessly laid out on the head, that might be a little more complicated. But for something like the pieces of this pen, I can be a bit more quick with it. So I'm going to hide my ground plane, and I'm going to open my UV editor. Or you may also, if you want to try, you can switch this to UV editing mode, and that will actually give you your UV editor docked with your camera on the other side, so that might be useful for this. And so this piece is already UV'd. If we take a look at that, and this is basically what I'm going to aim for all of the pieces of my pen eventually, not in this video, but before I start texturing everything, I do want them all to be UV'd. And so this one's already been done, and I'm going to go through the technique that I used to create this. And I'll start with this thing, and I'm also going to do this piece because I do want to actually put a logo on this clip. So I'm going to have to lay out my UV specifically to allow for that. But on this thing, so I don't like this whole jumbled up spiderweb look that's going on. Obviously, this is unusable to any degree for actually doing texturing because there's so many things overlapping and they're not the right shape or anything. So I'm going to start just by kind of, some people would tell you to delete your UVs and just start with no UVs at all. That's okay, doesn't really matter to me, but what I usually start with is going UV and then doing a planar map and just planar mapping the whole object, even though that also isn't how we're really going to end up texturing this, but at least now that gives me all of my UVs in one shell. So this over here is a shell now. I can move it around in 2D space, but clearly this is not suitable for texturing because it looks okay only from the y-axis and everything else is very stretched out. But that is not why we did the planar map. The planar map is there so that now I can essentially cut my object into multiple pieces, starting from this one cohesive shell. So I'm going to actually isolate this so I don't have to see my other objects. And the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to decide that I want to unfold this. I'm going to cut it down the length, so this direction horizontally. Just like I'm going to, if I was going to like cut a empty, paper towel roll or any other cardboard tube down to unfold it, I would need to cut it down the length first. So I'm going to put my seam on the bottom. So I'm going to select this whole loop down the bottom because if I'm going to look at my pen mostly from this angle or any other angle, I want my seams to be out of the way. So with that edge selected, I'm just going to go over to my UV toolkit and I'm going to say cut, and that didn't really do anything. But it technically split that edge only in the 2D mode. It didn't split my model, it just split the shell. And if I hit unfold, it will attempt to unfold the whole thing and flatten it, because that's our ultimate goal with UVs, of course, but it can't do it yet because there's still more things that I have to separate. And in this case, that is these rings, not these rings on the front and back end of my pen piece are preventing it from being unfolded because it's trying to completely flatten this into a 100% 2D shape. So if there's anything that's like doesn't work in a completely flat world, it won't be able to unfold it. So since those parts are attached, they're preventing me from completely unfolding this. And we're just going to do the same thing, cut. And now, just by cutting that, you can already see that this is technically two shells now. Obviously, they are still not correctly set up, but if I do another unfold, and I do an unfold on this one, now Maya has done its best to straighten those out and get them laid flat like a piece of paper, which now it can do because this whole outside piece, this outside shell, is essentially, a wrapping paper that can be unfolded completely, and the inside is another piece of wrapping paper, so to speak, that also can be unfolded completely. And I might run a few times. There also the optimize button can help to kind of spread out the UVs a little bit. There's an optimize tool here, which you can kind of like paint where you want. I mean, that was just holding on the B key and dragging. That's how you change the brush size in all Maya tools that involve brushes. So sculpting, soft selection, it's always just hold down B and drag. Anyway, so I don't think I can optimize this more than that. And to be perfectly honest, I don't really care that much about the inside piece because it's on the inside, and I don't really care about texturing in there very detailed. So the last thing I'm going to do in terms of this is just grab both of these, and I'm going to go to my arrange and layout, and I might orient them so that it will get them either vertical or horizontal, depending on which one makes the most sense. And if I click layout on one of them, it'll put it into this box. If I click on both of them, it will grab both of them into the box as well. And of course, hopefully everybody's aware of this already, but you want to make sure that your UVs are staying all within this 1-to-1 square, or 0-to-1 if you want to think of it that way. There are techniques for, of course, using other tiles here, but you will even if you were going to be using multiple tiles, you need to keep the texture maps or the UV maps for a specific part always in 1-to-1, because your images that you bring in for textures are always going to be square aspect ratio. Yeah, and that's pretty much all I'm going to do for this piece, other than, of course, can't forget to delete your history, because if I go back to my regular view and I can see my inputs here on my history, I have all those UV tools, and I need to delete those history items. So now that this is laid out, I may want to check, of course, my checkerboard, and we can see that, well, a few areas here might be getting a little bit stretched. So this is like slightly becoming a rectangle. These are pretty okay. Some of them are getting a little distorted near the seam, but if we're just keeping this simple and we're not too concerned about those, little areas that we're not really going to see, then we should be good. It's really the outside part that's the most important. So I'm going to do the exact same thing on this piece. I'm actually going to switch my workspace back to UV editing. I kind of liked having that like that. And so let's try the exact same thing. So UV, I'm just going to planar map. Now we can see my whole object represented in here as one shell. Now this one is going to be, there's a few different ways we could go about doing this, but what I'm probably going to start by doing is cutting this clip off completely. Got some slightly weird looking geometry down here, and this is technically a triangle, but since it looks okay, I left it like that on purpose, so you gotta choose wisely. Anyway, so I'm gonna cut this part off probably, and now this is its own thing. Of course, this still can't be flattened because there's still too many completely watertight areas in the UV sense that can't be unfolded. And this one will be very similar to the other cylinder, basically. So, but I gotta be careful though, because check this out. I selected this, I have this isolated, and I selected this whole loop, but that is technically selecting the whole model, even though that I was in isolation mode. So I do want to be a little bit careful. It probably wouldn't be the worst thing in the world to cut this, but I might end up having to sew that back together. So maybe I'll do that anyway, just to show you how that works. So I'm gonna cut this whole thing, and as we saw before, unfold. Ew. unfold that, unfold that. So this piece, same problem as before. I do need to cut off at least one of the cylindrical ends, and maybe I'll just do one this time, and we can see if that is sufficient to unfold it, which it seems like it is. Now, this you may have to decide whether you like this or not, because now the inside is being part of this one shell, and maybe you feel like that's unnecessary. But I'll leave this alone for now. And now the important part is the clip, and why do I say this is the important part? It's because this is the part that's going to have an actual important piece of texturing on it, which is the logo. And right now, I see this white seam going down here when I'm in UV view, and that means that this is being split apart, and that's not really ideal, obviously, for trying to texture this. So what I'm going to do is, in my UV view, I'm going to grab some of these UVs on the edge here, and I can see where they are in 3D at the same time. And I'm going to sew them together, and then you're going to have to keep unfolding a lot. That's okay, because that's just part of how this works. And I might grab these and sew those together. So and this is why I was saying be careful, because if I had just selected the correct edge, oh, I hit the wrong button there. If I just selected the correct edge earlier instead of like mass chopping this apart, I probably wouldn't have had to sew this back together. But what I'm probably going to do is to preserve the front part here, I am going to try and select just down around the back. Interesting. I feel like this piece should be unfolding a little bit better already. I'm gonna pause this video for a second. All right, I just paused that. So here's the deal is. So this is correct, except that it's still not totally ideal, because at the end here there's a pretty noticeable wonkiness going on. So here's a little trick that might help. Actually, I mean, for the most part, this looked pretty good. I still don't necessarily like that end being so distorted. I might first try just cutting that, and maybe I can try using this cut tool, and just kind of, this is another way of doing it, so I can just kind of drag over edges and cut them automatically, which is pretty cool. Again, all these tools are available just for you to use as you see fit, so if you like one of them and you want to use it, that's up to you. If you have another, if you would like to do it more straightforward, that's also up to you. And this is the part where I'm starting to get a little carried away, and I feel like perhaps I might need to take a different approach. So now that I already have this cut up, I might grab, so I just selected all these faces here, which corresponds to selecting the same faces in 3D. And I'm going to planar map, but this time I'm actually doing it on purpose. And I'm going to project from, if we look here, we're looking in the x-axis, and I'm going to project, and I can get that shape. And now this is still all one shell, so I'm kind of starting from scratch just on this one piece. And what I might do here is almost separate the back part from the front part completely, instead of trying to split it down the center. And so I'm going to cut and unfold to see what happens. So now this is my whole front piece, and this is the whole back piece. And that seam, it's up for debate whether that is a good place to put it, but I feel like the unfolding that I get from this is going to be a little bit more suitable for texturing, because you can see these squares are a little bit more evenly laid out, aside from that one seam. But this is the side we're going to be looking at the most. So, you know, I could spend much longer than this going back and forth and deciding how I want to lay out my UVs, but I think I'm just going to call this good to go for now, just so I can end this video. And of course, don't forget the other steps we were talking about. So I can take all of these and orient them, and I can also lay them out. Now, you don't have to use the layout that Maya gives you, because sometimes you might want to manually resize or place a certain object in your scene a certain way. So, you know, if I want to scale this down or whatever manually and move it manually, then that is completely within the realm of possibility. So use Maya to get most of the grunt work done, but you don't have to stick with the stuff Maya gives you. So I think I will end the video now. It's already been 15 minutes, so that's plenty of time to talk about UVing for right now. Obviously, there's more complicated UVs that will come up in the future on more complicated objects, but for now, this whole select edges, cut, unfold, and then rinse and repeat technique should be fine. All right, hope that helps. See everybody later.